Our story begins with Customs Officer Robert Mazer, working as an undercover agent on a drug trafficking case. That particular day, Robert went into a bowling alley, disguised as a common drug dealer. Moments later, another man came up to him. Their conversation was brief, and immediately afterward, Robert discreetly passed a bag to the man. As he prepared to exit the bowling alley, Robert suddenly felt a sharp pain in his chest. For his own reasons, he claimed he was all right and urged his contact to leave quickly. The instant they stepped outside the front door, it became clear that police and customs officers were positioned there to arrest them both. The two were taken into custody and placed in separate cars. Robert, being a part of the customs team, received immediate help from his colleague, Mark. Robert's chest had been hurt by a device stuck there. Up to that point, the contact who took the bag had no idea it was Robert who arranged his arrest. Having concluded his case for the day, Robert went home. There, he collected all his counterfeit identities and set them ablaze in front of his wife, who deeply wished Robert would finally leave his dangerous job as an undercover agent. To enjoy his time off, Robert took his family to visit Aunt Vicky's house for the holidays. His aunt cautioned Robert against getting lost in his professional world, urging him to give more focus and attention to his wife and son. The following day at the office, a briefing was conducted to address a new assignment called Operation Sea Chase. For this new case, Robert found himself partnered with Amira Brew. Despite being eligible to apply for retirement due to his long years of government service and the injury sustained on his last mission, he firmly refused it. That evening, while Robert was enjoying family time, he was startled by Amira's sudden and unannounced arrival. Amira told him about an informant who could potentially lead them directly to Gonzalo Mora. Amira believed they could leverage this informant to get one step closer to the powerful drug dealer cartels. Robert, unfortunately, was skeptical, thinking Amira's informant might just be someone fabricating information for cash. He questioned how much faith Amira had in this source. Amira simply answered, "As much as you trust me." Amira proceeded to contact the informant anyway. During a morning run together, Robert outlined a potential strategy for their mission to Mark. He suggested a psychological tactic to identify drug cartel leaders by exploiting their hunger for money rather than focusing on drugs. His main problem was a discomfort with working alongside Amira. Mark countered that it was Robert who would be unable to succeed without Amira's help. In Mark's view, Amira was the essential key for Robert to successfully infiltrate the powerful cartels. The next day, Robert and Amira visited a public cemetery, seeking new identities they could later adopt for their disguises by using the names of individuals who had passed away long ago. After reviewing several names etched on tombstones, Robert ultimately selected the name Robert Musila, while Amira opted for Emilio Dominguez. For this mission, Robert received a sound recorder cleverly concealed within a suitcase, engineered in such a way that it operated silently. To make his disguise more believable, a businessman provided an office and all its amenities for Robert to use, posing as a money laundering professional. Identification cards, crucial files, bank accounts, and all other necessities for the disguise were prepared by the authorities. Elsewhere, Amira's informant held a meeting with Gonzalo. He convinced Gonzalo to clean his illicit money through Robert Musila's new company. In short, following much deliberation, Gonzalo arranged a meeting with Amira. The two of them came to an agreement on a cooperation. Meanwhile, Robert visited a prison to see an inmate named Dominic. There, he requested Dominic's assistance in his undercover mission, offering freedom in return. Dominic was initially unwilling to help, not wanting to become a traitor despite no longer being employed by his boss, but he eventually had a change of heart and consented to work with both Robert and Amira. Their time to assume the roles of money laundering businessmen began. Each day, Robert was required to verify the amount of money arriving from the cartel. He would then break it down into smaller, nominal amounts that could be circulated safely. A few days after they officially began their work together, Robert and Gonzalo finally met face-to-face at a nightclub. During their discussion, Robert guaranteed that his company could secure the funds because he worked exclusively with legitimate corporations. Robert's objective this time was to earn Gonzalo's trust, hoping he could then request an introduction to Gonzalo's superiors. That would allow him to convince their drug cartel to launder vast sums of money through his company. To seal the deal, Gonzalo offered Robert a prostitute, already paid to satisfy his every desire. He thought of his wife, a woman he'd known since their junior high days, the woman with whom he built a family. Robert declined the gift, stating that he was already engaged and would be married soon. Every time they completed an operation, Robert and Amira would invariably argue due to their differing methods for conducting their undercover work. They shared the same objective, which was to entrap the drug mafia and bring them to justice. But rather than trace the flow of drugs being distributed, their strategy was to follow the trail of the drug-produced money. This approach ensured that even individuals who were never physically seen in the business could be identified from the financial traces of where all the money was traveling. Briefings covering the development and subsequent phases of their operations were held routinely every so often. The next day, once the briefing concluded, Robert was introduced to a woman named Kathy, slated to play the part of his fiancée and, eventually, his future wife for the operation. Not long after, Gonzalo finally made the decision to introduce Robert to the individual managing Pablo Escobar's money laundering, Javier Ospina. Pablo Escobar was the notorious leader of the most powerful drug cartel of that era, which had monopolized the circulation of cocaine-type narcotics. The cartel was called the Medellin Cartel, with its base of operations in Colombia. Flying on a private jet, Robert flew Ospina to a mansion he presented as his own. Robert proposed a partnership in laundering the money that belonged to Pablo Escobar, but Ospina remained undecided, saying he needed to confirm the arrangement with his own big boss first. Their conversation that day didn't result in an agreement, but they nevertheless enjoyed their time at the mansion. As Robert was ascending the stairs, he encountered Ospina, who unexpectedly reached out and touched Robert's private area. It became apparent that Ospina was gay. The advance made Robert feel quite uncomfortable. He went to Gonzalo, stating he didn't care for their partnership if it meant dealing with a gay man, but Gonzalo assured Robert that Ospina's actions would not escalate beyond that. Just as they were preparing to depart, Ospina came over to Robert. He announced that he had agreed to cooperate with the money laundering business proposal. One day, while at his office, Robert received a call from Akbar Bilgrami, a banking officer with the Bank of Credit and Commerce International, or BCCI, in Panama. He mentioned to Robert that some checks might contain minor typos, but this turned out to be merely a pretext to discuss the real subject. He had noticed that Robert's company's financial dealings were exceptionally active. Consequently, he offered to manage all of Robert's financial activities as a form of exclusive service provided by the bank directly to Robert. For Robert, this was a significant advantage, allowing him to learn more about the mechanics of the money and the people involved. Every conversation with Bilgrami was secretly recorded by Robert. To advance their cooperation, Robert was invited to the bank to meet with senior bank officials. At this meeting, Robert was promised that the bank would actively assist him in managing his funds. Robert himself was diligent about recording every single conversation he had as evidence. Sometime after that, Robert encountered Barry at a horse racetrack. Barry was a pilot who was also entangled in the Medellin cartel's network. His assignment was smuggling cocaine from Colombia into America. They both left together in a car that Barry was driving. While they were discussing something inside the car, a motorcycle suddenly pulled alongside them and abruptly shot Barry in the head, killing him on the spot. The vehicle they were in immediately spun out of control and flipped over, but fortunately, Robert managed to survive the horrific accident. It was later discovered that the person who shot Barry was one of Escobar's men, because Barry, in addition to being a cocaine smuggling pilot, was also secretly an informant for the CIA. That was the reason Escobar ultimately decided to eliminate him. Back in Robert's office, he was reassured that Escobar was not targeting him, because if it was discovered that Robert was a target, their entire operation would almost certainly fail. To make a long story short, Robert did not want to postpone meeting other mafias within the drug cartel any longer, especially considering the escalating danger of the situation. He subsequently met with Ospina to arrange an appointment with the boss to help broaden his company's network. Robert was then blindfolded and transported to an undisclosed location to meet Roberto Alcano, a drug dealer and cocaine distributor operating under the direct authority of Pablo Escobar. But meeting him wasn't so simple. Robert had to undergo specific inspections conducted by someone performing a strange ritual. Individuals who failed to pass this ritual were shot dead. After he successfully passed the ritual, He was allowed some time to compose himself before his meeting with the big boss. Shortly after, Robert finally met Elcano. During the meeting, they covered a wide range of topics, primarily focused on where and how the illicit drug money was being utilized. The discussion ultimately brought them closer. Elcano didn't even shy away from inviting Robert to his own home. Furthermore, his wife developed a close rapport with Kathy. Transaction after transaction was executed flawlessly. Robert proved capable of helping him with his money, and from that point on, he earned a great deal of trust from Robert. He now viewed Robert as a genuine friend. He also freely bestowed lavish gifts upon Kathy. The news of Barry's death eventually reached Elcano. He never imagined that his best friend could be a government informant. He was deeply upset by the news because he hadn't expected his best friend to collaborate with the government. But now, he was thankful to have found Robert, his trustworthy new best friend. He trusted Robert so completely, he devised ways to introduce him to Pablo Escobar. Elcano later requested Robert's help to release $10 million held under the name of Don Cheap. The money in that particular account had been frozen at the Bank of Panama. The funds were the property of Pablo Escobar himself. Robert attempted to clarify the predicament so his fellow undercover agents could assist him, but they were powerless because the account was frozen by presidential mandate. While Robert was still devising strategies to salvage the money, he also began receiving terroristic threats from Pablo Escobar. He was sent a package that contained a miniature coffin filled with blood. Understanding how perilous her husband's work was, she pleaded with her husband to retire at once. Robert later met with Elcano, asking him to inform Don Cheap that he and his company refused to operate under duress. Later on, Robert held a meeting with Bill Gramy and Umjad Alwin, who were delegates from the BCCI. As a valued client at their bank, Robert requested that both of them assist in dispersing the $10 million from Don Cheap's frozen bank account in Panama. Recognizing a lucrative opportunity, Alwin agreed to the request, but, as a condition, he demanded that Robert increase his total deposit to the bank. He then offered to arrange a meeting between Robert and other high-ranking BCCI officials. He subsequently took a flight to Paris to be present at the meeting. Remarkably, Kathy, who was also attending the meeting with Robert, suddenly revealed her upcoming wedding to Robert and extended an invitation for everyone to attend the party. After that, Robert met with a confidant of Pablo Escobar, who was named Rudy. Besides Rudy, Ospina was also in attendance at the meeting. In the midst of their discussion, Robert's suitcase was accidentally knocked open, which exposed a voice recorder that was concealed inside it. Although the incident was successfully downplayed, Ospina had caught a glimpse of it and felt deeply betrayed by Robert. Unfortunately for him, he was later murdered in a bar by one of Pablo Escobar's men. In the morning, as Robert and Kathy were preparing to check out of the hotel, Rudy approached them. He granted Robert the authority to execute a transaction of $150 million to the BCCI. Robert's plan to return home was now postponed. He would travel to BCCI's headquarters in London, while Kathy would go back to begin preparations for their phony wedding. Kathy went to see Robert's wife to get Robert's wedding suit. At that time, Robert's wife felt anxious that her husband was having an affair with Kathy, but when Kathy demonstrated that Robert loved his wife dearly, she felt relieved. While Robert was in London, his boss contacted him to say that, at that moment, Elcano was arranging to ship pure cocaine valued at $23 million into Miami. Robert pleaded for a bit more time until he could meet the founder of BCCI, but his superiors were unable to approve his request. A raid was subsequently launched at the packing location and at Elcano's residence. Regrettably, Elcano had already successfully fled the raid, and his wife had been able to destroy some documentary evidence inside their home safe. After coming back from London, Robert went straight to Elcano's house to check on Elcano's wife's condition, as she was still in a state of shock following the raid. Compelled by her faith in Robert, she then granted cocaine distribution authority to Robert while her husband remained in hiding from the police. Robert, on the other hand, felt a great deal of sympathy for Elcano's wife and attempted to protect her by urging her to go back to Colombia, but she declined. She explained that she wanted to do something to help her husband, regardless of the risk involved. This situation placed Robert and Kathy in a difficult dilemma. On one hand, they were conducting an undercover mission to capture a drug cartel, but on the other, they lacked the heart to betray the trust that Alcano and his wife had placed in them. To reassure themselves about the course of action to take, they reminded themselves that it was simply a part of their job. The staged wedding party eventually arrived. Everything they required had been arranged with extreme care. The fake wedding ceremony became the very climax of their operation because every person involved with the drug cartel was expected to attend as a guest. Much like a school of fish swimming directly into a net, one by one, the targeted individuals were present. Even Alcano, who was deep in hiding at that time, was willing to take huge risks just to be at Robert's wedding. Robert felt glad about Alcano's presence, but another part of him wished he hadn't taken such a major risk. The ceremony at last commenced. Robert proceeded to the altar first to await Kathy's entrance as the bride. Before the wedding, vows were exchanged. The priest then instructed the bride and groom to turn and face all the assembled guests. Suddenly, a police car pulled up with a blaring siren. Police forces swarmed into every corner of the room, moving swiftly to apprehend the people who were in attendance. Everyone there was arrested, with no exceptions. That was the moment Robert and Kathy's lengthy disguise concluded. Alcano and his wife stared at Robert and Kathy with expressions filled with utter disappointment. Alcano's wife went as far as calling them traitors. They simply couldn't believe that Robert and Kathy were actually undercover agents. After that operation concluded, Robert was finally able to concentrate on his small family, but he continued to do his job. Robert was brought in as a witness in court proceedings in New York, Tampa, and London.